BBC News at 6 o'clock. This is Diana Speed. Good evening. The Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn is facing conflicting views from within his party about whether to support a second Brexit referendum. One of the architects of New Labour, Alistair Campbell, has been expelled from the party for voting Lib Dem at the European elections. Theresa May has joined other EU leaders for a summit in Brussels and called on her successor as Conservative leader to find a compromise Brexit deal. The inquest into the London Bridge attacks has heard how the ringleader was influenced by the radical preacher Anjem Choudhury. The high street chemist Boots is looking at closing up to 200 stores. Malaysia has become the latest Asian country to stop importing plastic waste, telling the UK it will no longer be the world's dumping ground. One of Jeremy Corbyn's main backers has endorsed Labour's Brexit policy on the same day a key figure in the party's recent history, Alistair Campbell, was expelled for his protest against it. Mr Campbell, who was thrown out for voting for the Liberal Democrats in the European elections, defended his actions, saying he wanted the leadership to see sense on backing another referendum. But Len McCluskey, the leader of the Unite Union, said the party shouldn't be spooked and should repel calls to strongly back another public vote. Here's our assistant political editor, Norman Smith.
Despite the intense pressure on Mr Corbyn to openly campaign for another Brexit referendum, opponents today launched a concerted fight back to defend the party's current policy, a policy widely criticised in the wake of Labour's disastrous European election results, including by key members of the shadow cabinet, for leaving voters confused. Today, however, Labour MPs and Leave-supporting seats hit back, warning another referendum could easily result in no deal. Lisa Nandy, the MP for Wigan, said it would be seen as a breach of trust by many Labour Leave voters and that without their support, Mr Corbyn would never make it to Downing Street. And crucially, Len McCluskey, the leader of the Unite Union and a pivotal supporter of Mr Corbyn, cautioned against any change in policy.
My message today is for people to calm down. Don't be spooked by these elections. The only party that has tried to unite the nation and appeal to both Leavers and Remainers is the Labour Party. So it's time for reflection, not to be spooked. Calm down. That's my message in the Labour Party.
Other key allies of Mr Corbyn, however, have taken the opposite view, among them the Shadow Home Secretary Diane Abbott, who said if Labour was unable to secure a general election, then it should back another referendum with Remain on the ballot paper. She was asked if this meant the party now had a clear line in favour of another referendum.
I think we're moving towards a clearer line. The People's Vote's always been part of our policy package. And as Keir Starmer put it, we move through the gears. But now, at, minutes to midnight, we think it's important to foreground the People's Vote.
In a further sign of the intense infighting over Labour's Brexit policy, Tony Blair's former Director of Communications, Alistair Campbell, was today expelled from the party after he announced he had voted for the Liberal Democrats because of their support for another referendum. Party sources said backing another party was a clear breach of Labour rules. Mr Campbell, however, a lifelong Labour member, remained defiant.
I think that the Labour Party was hammered in these elections because of the incoherent position it's been taking. I'm pleased that the Labour Party seems to be moving into a more sensible position now. And I'll keep fighting for a People's Vote because I think in the end it's where this thing should and will end.
Much will now depend on Mr Corbyn and who he chooses to listen to. So far, he's given little away, leaving both sides to interpret his remarks on a public vote as best they can, a stance that seems likely only to add to the confusion and to intensify the demands for an end to the lack of clarity about Labour's position on Brexit.
The Labour Party is to be formally investigated over allegations of anti-Semitism by the Equality and Human Rights Commission. The party says it will cooperate with the inquiry, but has denied any wrongdoing. However, the campaign against anti-Semitism said it was devastating that a mainstream party had fallen so far into the gutter. Here's our political correspondent, Jessica Parker.
Earlier this year, the Equality and Human Rights Commission announced it was considering launching an investigation into allegations of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. Today, it confirmed that inquiry would go ahead, examining whether the party had unlawfully discriminated against, harassed or victimised people because they were Jewish. Dame Louise Ellman, an MP and the Vice-Chair of Labour Friends of Israel, said it was shameful that a party that prided itself on being anti-racist was now being investigated in this way. A Labour spokesperson said that the party was implacably opposed to anti-Semitism and that it rejected any suggestion that it didn't handle complaints fairly. Meanwhile, the Muslim Council of Britain has written to the EHRC, formally requesting an investigation into Islamophobia in the Conservative Party, claiming that the problem runs deep. The party has previously said that its complaints process is robust.
A leading Conservative Brexiteer has criticised a plan advocated by the leadership hopeful Jeremy Hunt that the negotiating team the UK sends to Brussels should include supporters of a no-deal departure from the EU. Jacob Rees-Mogg said such an approach was well-intentioned, but ministries of all the talents had not tended to be successful. Two more MPs have confirmed they have entered the race to replace Theresa May, taking the total so far to 11. Here's our political correspondent, Ben Wright.
The question of whether the next Tory Prime Minister would countenance a no-deal Brexit at the end of October is framing the early days of this contest. Boris Johnson has already said the UK must leave the EU with or without a formal agreement. Dominic Raab has said the same. But others, including the Health Secretary Matt Hancock, have said Parliament would not allow a no-deal Brexit, and that's the crux of Jeremy Hunt's pitch to his party. Launching his bid to be the next Tory leader, the Foreign Secretary said any Prime Minister who attempted to take the UK out of the EU without a deal would trigger a confidence vote in the House of Commons and a general election. Mr Hunt said that would be political suicide for the Tories and potentially lead to a Labour government. Better, he said, to deliver Brexit before the next election and try to change the withdrawal agreement.
If you have proper representation in your negotiating team from other voices, as I say, particularly the DUP, but also I think voices from Scotland and Wales, and indeed the ERG inside the Conservative Party, I think you can then give Brussels confidence that they are talking to someone who can deliver a deal.
It's an appeal for pragmatism Mr Hunt hopes will cut through to the Tory electorate, MPs and party members. But the Brexit enthusiast Esther McVey, another leadership candidate, insisted political suicide would be not leaving the EU on October the 31st. The Tory MP Jacob Rees-Mogg, who is backing Boris Johnson, doubted Jeremy Hunt's idea would work.
I think it's a very well-intentioned offer, and I think it's right that all the leadership candidates should seek to unite both the country and the Conservative Party, but I think there may not be time to put together this sort of group.
Meanwhile, speaking at an event in Washington, the Speaker of the Commons, John Bercow, said there was no inevitability about a no-deal Brexit. The idea the House won't have its say is for the birds, Mr Bercow said.
The leaders of the 28 EU member states are gathering in Brussels for an informal dinner to begin the process of choosing candidates to fill the most powerful jobs in the EU. New presidents of the European Commission, Council and Parliament have to be appointed, as well as a new leader of the European Central Bank. Theresa May is at the meeting, although the UK, as a departing member, isn't set to play a key role in the appointments. From Brussels, our Europe correspondent Kevin Connolly.
The mechanism for filling the top jobs in Brussels involves a complex interplay of forces, including the interests of powerful member states, the ambitions of individual candidates, and the views of the various factions in an increasingly fragmented parliament. More entertainingly, it also involves a high degree of old-fashioned deal-making and manoeuvring behind the scenes. The early favourite for the most powerful job, replacing Jean-Claude Juncker at the European Commission, was the German Manfred Weber, and Angela Merkel arrived, assuring reporters that he remains her choice.
Tonight I will press for action. It would be best if we can present a candidate by the time the Parliament convenes. I will obviously voice my support for Manfred Weber. We should nevertheless remain civil in our talks and keep in mind that we have a constructive task in front of us.
But there's plenty of opposition to Mr Weber too. The Conservative bloc he represents in the European Parliament, the EPP, lost some seats in the weekend's elections. So some EU leaders think the appointment should reflect the strong performance of the Liberals and Greens in those elections. And Emmanuel Macron, even if he might not choose to say it quite so directly, will want one of the big jobs for France. As the departing leader of a departing state, Theresa May's influence in the process will be guided by what's called the principle of sincere cooperation, and it will be limited. As she arrived, she spoke wistfully, but inevitably, of Brexit.
While I've been Prime Minister, I've been to something like 15 council meetings or more. At every one of those, I've been working hard to negotiate the best possible deal for the UK in leaving the European Union, and it's a matter of great regret to me that I haven't been able to deliver Brexit. But of course, that matter is now for my successor.
None of the big jobs in Brussels will be filled at this meeting. Appointments might be made in June. But the new team will eventually face the task of completing Brexit and then managing the EU's future trade negotiations with the UK.
The inquest into the London Bridge attack has heard that the ringleader was inspired by the head of a banned Islamic group in the months before the incident. Khurram Butt was said to have been energised when he was in the company of Anjem Choudhury, who was convicted of inciting support for the Islamic State group. Along with Rashid Redwan and Youssef Zagbar, Butt killed 8 people and injured 48 in a van and knife attack in June 2017. Reporting from the inquest at the Old Bailey, here's our correspondent, Richard Lister.
The inquest has spent most of the day looking at how Butt, Redwan and Zagbar went from being respectful young men, praised by work colleagues, to violent jihadists. The court heard that one important influence for Butt was the convicted radical preacher Anjem Choudhury, whose visits were said to have left Butt like a lion out of his cage. So concerned was his family, they took away Butt's passport, and his brother-in-law reported him on the anti-terror hotline. The court heard that Redwan, a Moroccan, settled in London after marrying a woman from the Irish Republic. He worked at a cake shop, but his extremism revealed itself when he told a friend the jihadist murder of Lee Rigby in 2013 was the government's fault. It emerged in court that he took his child to places where the London Bridge attack was being prepared. Youssef Zagbar, also originally from Morocco, moved to London in 2015 and worked at a restaurant. The authorities had noted that when asked in 2016 by border control in Istanbul why he was there, he replied to be a terrorist, before quickly saying tourist. It's thought he met Butt and Redwan in the months before the attack, when they were members of the same gym.
The retailer Boots the Chemist is considering closing up to 200 stores in the coming months. The company, which is owned by the American firm Walgreens Boots Alliance, is one of the biggest players on the high street. With the details, here's our business correspondent, Jonty Bloom.
Online shopping and the arrival of new, cheaper supermarkets which sell health and beauty products have been eating into Boots' traditional market. Now it's reacting by looking at the future of some 200 of its 2,500 stores, mostly in towns where it has 2 shops and no longer needs both of them. The company is not expected to announce all the closures at once, but will be examining each one case by case over the next year to 18 months, and it will try to redeploy staff if possible. It would be particularly attractive to close stores whose lease is coming to an end, rather than having to shut a branch and still keep paying rent because of a long-running contract. However, some retail experts are bound to think that Boots has reacted very slowly to a rapidly changing market and needs much more radical and speedier surgery.